Yesterday, a family laid his son to rest, 16 days after he vanished from a beach full of hundreds of people. They still don't know how he died. Both a state autopsy and an independent one performed in Washington, D.C. have already happened. Somewhere in the paperwork from those two exams is the beginning of an answer. Here's what we don't know going into this. What actually happened to Nolan Wells in his final hour on that island? How does an 18-year-old disappear from a beach crowded with strangers who could have filmed him without even trying? And why, 16 days later, do the people who were closest to him that day still not agree on what happened in his final minutes? We're going to walk through this the way the investigation itself has had to, one piece at a time, in the order the pieces actually arrived. If you're new here, we've followed this case from day one. Subscribe now so you're with us for what's coming, and if you want more updates like this, drop a like. It tells us to keep digging. Let's start at the beginning of that afternoon. July 4th, Horn Island, 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, nearly 14 miles long, barely a mile wide at its widest point. No roads reach it, no bridges, no reliable cell service. The National Park Service, which manages it as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, describes it plainly on its own site. No staff, no drinking water, no shelter, no facilities. The only way in or out is by boat. That isolation is exactly what draws people there on a holiday. Nolan Wells arrived with 3 friends around mid-morning on a stretch of beach that would fill with hundreds of visitors by afternoon, the island's northwestern tip, known for calm water and open sand. Volunteers who later searched that same stretch have described how deceptive that calm can be. In some spots, you can go from standing in 3 feet of water to 20 feet within a few steps, the sandbar dropping away without warning. Nolan was last seen alive there around 3 p.m. Sometime after that, his friends got back in their boat and returned to the mainland. Nolan didn't go with them. That much isn't in dispute. What happens next is where this case starts to fracture. Because if hundreds of people were on that beach that day, how does one of them simply disappear without a single stranger noticing? Cheryl McCollum has consulted on cases involving Tupac Shakur and the Zodiac Killer. She's not connected to this case personally. She's the kind of expert brought in specifically because she isn't. And when she reviewed the newly released dispatch audio and GPS data, she said something that's been quietly bothering investigators too. There were hundreds of people out there, McCollum said. How somebody did not see him is pretty shocking to me, especially if he left one group that knows him to go with another group that clearly knows him. Her point cuts deeper than it first sounds. Even a total stranger filming a wide shot of the crowd could have caught him in camera without realizing it. Even if I did not know him, if I'm just taking a video of the whole crowd, I could have captured him. Investigators are now combing through exactly that kind of footage, video from people who don't even know they might have him in frame, gathered from a beach full of strangers who had no reason to think any of it mattered at the time. So if he didn't vanish unseen, where is the footage? And if the footage exists somewhere in someone's camera roll for a holiday weekend, why hasn't it surfaced yet? One piece of this did get answered, the boat itself. Audio obtained by NBC News captures the vessel's operator calling a towing company. "Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can you all please come? I want to get this boat unsunk and towed back." When the dispatcher asked if everyone on board was okay, the caller answered yes, everyone was accounted for, except Nolan, who had already told the group he'd catch a ride back later with someone else, after meeting a young woman on the island that day. GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources backs up the shape of that timeline almost minute by minute.
The boat left its dock at 9:56 that morning and reached Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. It left the island again at 4:31 p.m. without Nolan and returned to its original dock. From there, it moved into Fort Bayou around 5:52, back to the dock at 6:06, then to a boat launch at 7:19 that evening, before finally being towed by land to the boat owner's home in Biloxi. So the boat leaving isn't mysterious anymore. A mechanical failure, confirmed by a recorded call, confirmed by tracking data, confirmed by the timestamps matching up almost to the minute. That part of the story holds up cleanly. But here's what that timeline doesn't explain. If the boat left because of engine trouble, and everyone agrees Nolan chose to stay behind on his own, then why 16 days later is there this much doubt about what happened between the moment they left and the moment his body was found? Before autopsies, before GPS data, before any expert weighed in, it was small, ordinary details that first made Cheryl's parents stop trusting the story they were being told. The first was the keys. Wells' family says his phone and car keys ended up in the possession of one of the friends who came back from the island without him. Elmore's father, Elmore, has described going to that young man's home to retrieve them, being told at first they couldn't be found until someone else in the room said she'd seen them the day before. The keys turned up shortly after that. Elmore has said that's the exact moment he stopped trusting anything else he was told about that day. The phone raised its own question, one that's followed this case from the very beginning. The family says they located it themselves using a location tracking app rather than being told where it was by anyone who had it. Attorney Ben Crump has asked the question that's echoed through this case since then. What teenager leaves his phone behind if he actually plans to spend the night on a remote island with no way to reach anyone? Neither detail proves anything on its own. A missing set of keys that turn up minutes later, a phone the family had to track down themselves. But together, they were the first cracks, the moment two grieving parents decided the simplest explanation wasn't going to be enough.
Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind was the first person with any medical authority to see Nolan Wells' body. His original assessment, no immediate, obvious signs of foul play or trauma. Read that phrase slowly because it's not the clean answer it sounds like at first. No obvious signs is a statement about what a coroner can see with his own eyes in the field, not a conclusion about what actually happened. It's precisely why Lind's office requested a full state autopsy in the first place, to look for what isn't visible on the surface. 16 days later, that full autopsy and a second independent one performed in Washington, D.C., specifically to keep it from any ties to Mississippi law enforcement, have both been carried out. Results from the independent autopsy are still pending, and the state medical examiner's office is still waiting on toxicology. Colin Kaepernick helped cover the cost of flying Nolan's body to D.C. for that independent exam. Toxicology alone can take 2 to 3 weeks even once an autopsy is physically complete, according to one forensic pathologist who spoke with CNN. He said he's personally waited that long on cases far less complicated than this one. So the process has run its course on both sides. It's just that neither report has produced a public answer yet, and won't until toxicology and the independent findings actually come back. Before the autopsies were even finished, one person with real legal authority looked at what was already public and drew his own conclusion, not about how Nolan died, but about what should have already happened by now. Carlos Moore spent over 6 years as a municipal court judge in Mississippi, signing warrants, presiding over hearings, nearly a quarter-century in the legal field. He went on record for over 30 minutes laying out a specific argument,
that the evidence for at least one arrest already exists, independent of anything the autopsies might show. His starting point was a video already circulating, a voice widely believed to be Nolan's saying, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" If Nolan didn't give permission for someone to keep that phone, and it was kept anyway, Moore argues that's theft, provable today without waiting on a single medical finding. Moore also said there should already be search warrants filed and subpoenas issued for the friend group's social media accounts, calling it standard procedure in any investigation that's actually moving. He took direct aim at the sheriff's early language, "no foul play suspected," arguing the honest statement at the time would have been that it was simply too early to say either way. To be exact about where this actually stands, no one in that friend group has been charged with anything. No one has been named a suspect by law enforcement. This is one former judge's public reading of a pattern: the keys, the deactivated accounts, lawyers retained before Nolan's body was even recovered, not a legal finding. But it's the reason so many people started asking harder questions before the medical evidence had even come back.
While all of this has played out publicly, something else has been happening inside the friend group itself, and it's not what you'd expect. Trayston Shepard, who is biracial and has known Nolan since their freshman year of high school, has pushed back hard on how this case has been framed. He told ABC News he objects to Crump centering the case solely around race before the investigation has concluded. "They're trying to spin a narrative that's not there," Shepard said. He's already spoken with investigators about what he saw that day and says he and his friends have received real threats over a story he believes has been distorted. "It worries me for my friends. It worries me for my family." Shepard also put something else to rest. A photo circulating online, supposedly showing Nolan at a pool party hours after he vanished. Shepard says it's actually from June 27th, weeks earlier, at a completely different location. So one person inside the circle everyone's questioning is publicly asking people to slow down, to let Nolan be remembered, in Shepard's words, as the sweet guy he was, not as a symbol shaped by fear. That raises its own question. If the people who were actually there are divided on how to even talk about what happened, what does that tell you about how much everyone else, watching from outside, actually knows? Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed his department has now interviewed more than 60 witnesses. He also confirmed something that expands this case well past a local missing person investigation. The FBI isn't only examining digital evidence. The agency told ABC News directly it's working to address interstate threats that were received by individuals related to this matter. It didn't name who received them, but several people connected to this case, including Shepard, have said publicly they've been threatened. Ledbetter says federal involvement isn't unusual since Horn Island sits on federal land and his office routinely works with federal agencies as a result. But stack it up. Over 60 witnesses interviewed, a mutual phone inspection now underway between the family's own experts and the state's, a grand jury already confirmed to be forming once the investigation wraps, and now federal agents investigating threats against the very people at the center of public suspicion. 16 days ago, this was a missing person report on a remote island most people outside Mississippi had never heard of. It is very clearly not that anymore. Now the piece that changes how you should look at everything you've just heard. Nolan reportedly stayed behind on the island to spend more time with a young woman he'd met that day, identified in multiple reports by her first name, Katie. Her mother, Gracie McCormick, has confirmed publicly that Katie was with Nolan and has stayed in contact with his family since, though she says her daughter has no knowledge of what happened after the two of them parted ways. Here's the contradiction sitting at the exact center of this case.
According to Crump, the account attributed to Katie has Nolan telling her he was heading back to the boat to leave with his friends. But the friend's own account, through Shepard, says Nolan told them he was staying behind, specifically to keep talking with Katie. Two different people describing the same few minutes of the same conversation, pointing in opposite directions. Nolan's own mother, Christine, has said there are a lot of inconsistencies in what she's been told about that day, and this is almost certainly what she means. Katie herself hasn't given a public on-camera account. What exists is her mother speaking on her behalf, and Crump's characterization of what investigators were told. Nothing here is settled, but this is the last known fork in the road, the final moment anyone can place Nolan alive, making a choice, and even that moment can't be agreed upon by the two sides who were actually part of it. Every question this episode has raised, the crowd that somehow saw nothing, the boat's confirmed timeline, the small details that first broke his parents' trust, the coroner's careful wording, a former judge's public argument, a friend pushing back on the narrative, 60-plus witnesses, and a widening federal presence, all of it circles back to this exact unresolved fork. Somebody's memory of those final minutes is wrong. Nobody outside that conversation knows whose.
Somewhere, two labs are still working through what will eventually become an answer, just not today. Let's put it all together, plainly, no speculation. Nolan Wells was last seen alive around 3 p.m. on July 4th, choosing to stay on Horn Island rather than leave with their friends. Their boat's early departure is explained by a documented mechanical failure, confirmed by both a recorded call and GPS data. Before any of that was known, small details, a missing set of keys, a phone the family had to track down themselves, were what first made their parents doubt the simplest explanation. Both the state and an independent autopsy have been performed, but toxicology and the independent findings both remain pending. No results have been released. The coroner has said there were no obvious external signs of trauma, which is not the same as no signs at all. A former judge has publicly argued that separate evidence, tied to the phone alone, may already support a theft charge. More than 60 witnesses have been interviewed, and the FBI is now involved both in digital evidence and in investigating threats against people connected to the case. A friend inside Nolan's circle has publicly disputed the case's racial framing, and at the center of everything sits one unresolved contradiction, two accounts of Nolan's final known conversation that cannot both be accurate. No one has been charged, no one has been named a suspect by law enforcement. That hasn't changed through any of this, and it's the one sentence that keeps this entire case honest. Nolan Wells was an 18-year-old who baked his parents salmon the night before a holiday, told his mother he loved her, and spent the 4th of July on the water with friends, the same way thousands of other teenagers did that same afternoon. Today, his family lays him to rest, still not knowing why he never came home. A quick note before you go. This case involves details some viewers may find disturbing, including a young life lost and unresolved questions around how. If you'd rather not continue, we understand completely, and we'll see you on the next one. If you're still with us, subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And we want your honest read. Whose account of those final minutes do you believe? His friends or Katie's? We'll bring you the facts the moment we actually have them, and not one moment before.